elongated body, a small spout, a minimal handle, a lid topped with a knob to open it. Ordinary attributes of a coffee maker reduced to their simplest expression. Architect Aldo Rossi named his coffee maker La Conica after the cone-shaped form of its lid.
Julie, réveille-toi, tu vas être en retard. Allez, sers-toi du café.
No decorations, no embellishments, nothing but the bare necessities. On the lower part of the cylinder-shaped body, sectioned in two, a safety valve shows on the surface. No doubt about it, it's an Italian, or espresso coffee maker. Its elegant design, its noble mirror-polished look, and its perfect finishings distinguish it from the commonplace, from ordinary aluminum and the stovepipe. Brought out in 1984, the Conica owes everything to its many-sided predecessor, born in 1933, the Mocha Express.
È un caffè forte e ricco. Un caffè che si distingue dagli altri.
It works on the same system of percolation and delayed lixiviation and steam pressure. Its predecessor's mascot says you might think it looks easy to make good coffee.
Oh, sì, sembra facile anche farsi un buon caffè.
But you need more than just ground coffee, water, and heat. You also need experience, careful preparation, and a good coffee maker.
La caffettiera Mocha Express.
Caffettiere Mocha Express in 5 misure diverse.
In the West, people systematically associate it with Italian families. The Mocha has been a veritable icon since the 50s and 60s, with 90% of families owning at least one. Some families, without being rich, own a whole series of them in all sizes, depending on the number of guests. The domestic espresso coffee maker marked a sea change in coffee consumption. The espresso moved from the bar to the home.
Caffettiera Mocha Express, l'unica con l'omino coi baffi, l'unica al mondo che è un prodotto Vialetti.
When the heated water boils, it turns to steam. As the steam expands, it exerts pressure on the water. The water is driven into the stem of the filter funnel where it comes into contact with a compact layer of coffee. Instead of casually passing through, the water is forced to permeate the ground coffee beans. "30 seconds later, the elixir spurts out, accompanied by a froth of essential oil, the aroma-producing crema. The espresso coffee maker draws its inspiration from the system of the wash boiler, a formerly common household object. It works on the old principle of percolation and lixiviation and steam pressure. The word lixiviation comes from the Latin lixivium, meaning leached out. Man has known about the physical properties of steam since antiquity, and the invention of the eolipile is attributed to a certain hero of Alexandria. No one knows what it was used for. Perhaps for the glory of owning a beautiful but useless object. At the end of the 17th century, Denis Papin was the first person to master steam pressure in a cooking pot to which he added a valve. It was the predecessor of the safety valve that prevents the risk of explosion. The safety valve is the sine qua non of our coffee maker. It wasn't until the early 19th century that the coffee dregs were removed. Pharmacist de Croisy had the idea, which seems so obvious today, of piercing small holes, thus inventing the principle of the percolator, from the Latin percolare, to filter. Since its beginnings in 1933, over 270 million mocha espresso coffee makers have been sold throughout the world. The 30s are now a distant memory, a time when the aluminum of the mocha espresso and its association with caffeine embodied the lifestyle of modern man: speed, mobility, strength, and energy. In the 70s and 80s, aluminum was supplanted once and for all. It was considered commonplace and overused and lost its appeal. From now on, people liked shine and sparkle. Designer Rossi and industrialist Alessi turned quite naturally to stainless steel.
The theme of the espresso coffee maker has very close ties to the history of the Alessi as a family and not just as industrialists, because it was my grandfather, my mother's father, Alphonse Bialetti, who invented the first espresso coffee maker system in the early 1930s. In the second half of the 70s, I thought it would be a good idea to pay homage to him by also making an espresso coffee maker, in stainless steel this time, and not in aluminum.
When he took up the industrialist's invitation at the end of the 70s, Aldo Rossi was already a famous architect, but had never designed any objects. Aldo Rossi approached the kitchen utensil as though it was one of his ascending buildings, using the same vocabulary of elementary shapes.
As you can see, there is no hinge on the Conica. It is the only Alessi coffee maker not to have one. The reason being that the shape was just so pure, simple, and strict that Aldo refused to add a hinge. He simply did not want to. Then, 5 years later, we managed to convince him that it did need a hinge, that it would be more practical, and that it would be closer to the archetype of my grandfather Bialetti's coffee maker. So he designed it, and of course, it is a little bit more practical.
Made in cast aluminum, the cupola is easier on the eye and on the purse strings. However, it was the design of the Conica that stood out in people's minds on account of its slick shape and its simple forms. A cylinder, a cone, and a sphere, and its elongated body, bearing a family resemblance to the coffee maker in Paul Cézanne's famous pre-cubist painting. It was as though Aldo Rossi had appropriated the precepts of the painter who recommended treating nature with cylinders, spheres, and cones. And he presented his Conica in 1984 with a mischievously elementary description. Conica, from the shape of the lid. Of course, he said, the cone is the name of a simple, solid, and round pyramid-shaped geometrical figure. By referring to the cone as pyramid-shaped, Aldo Rossi conjured up archetypes and, once again, symbols of ascension. Cones in profile make triangles, and triangles share the profile of tumuli, primitive tombs, pyramids, and also of roofs, spandrels, pediments, and cathedral spires. The point at the top, the triangle, indicates direction, symbolizing determination and penetration. An equilateral triangle symbolizes divinity and harmony, and represents balance and stability. Hence the charm of a single equilateral triangle signed Aldo Rossi in a Milan side street. Pared down but not austere, Aldo Rossi's world is made up of images from his childhood, beach huts and chapels from blissful holidays, a ball, a pennant, a factory chimney, a lighthouse. His drawings are a blend of architecture and everyday objects in unusual still lifes in which coffee makers are buildings, and buildings look like coffee makers. The coffee maker, notes Aldo Rossi, lends itself particularly well to various transpositions and analogies with buildings and architectural forms, particularly with domes, campaniles, and minarets. And it is not too far removed from a certain Oriental atmosphere or style, or rather a Turkish one. Its presence in interior compositions or still lifes lends a solidity to pictures, akin to compositions of urban landscapes, dominated by towers, domes, and various buildings. Aldo Rossi renders a whole facet of the life of shapes understandable. He discovers for us the migration of influences and analogies, from one world to another, from one scale to another, from an object to a monument. It all began between Aldo Rossi and Alberto Alessi with the Tea and Coffee Piazza, a research project on tea and coffee services. The project brought together not designers, but architects of the postmodern movement, with their playful mindset and their return to the themes of classical architecture. Aldo Rossi transformed the inevitable tray into a small tabernacle, theater, or maisonette, in keeping with his childhood-linked inspiration. The pennant, the school clock. With their hint of blue enamel, the silver coffee maker and teapot recall the domestic coffee maker and glorify the everyday object. The tea and coffee piazza objects inaugurated a whole wave of postmodern industrial objects made in Italy, among them the Conica. A Conica starts its life as a disc cut from a sheet of 1810 stainless steel, an 18% alloy of chrome and 10% of nickel. A disc for the cone. A disc for the kettle part. A disc for the upper container. The disc is gradually distorted using dishing presses. After each series of 3 distortions, the alloy is annealed so it can regain its elongation properties. To go from the disc to the final cone, the lid of the Conica undergoes 12 operations.
I have always liked this sort of ambiguity, which makes us work with contrasts. On the one hand, you have the hardness, which is specific to metals, the metal discs we have to work with, and also the hardness of the technique to transform them into finished objects. But on the other hand, there is a poetic aspect, which is really the fundamental element of our practice.
Descended from a family of tinsmiths, the Alessis built upon ancestral know-how, which has remained miraculously lively in Italy. Carlo heralded the entry of design into industry. Between 1935 and 1945, he designed many models, including the Bombe, which has become a reference in Italian-style design. After the war, the company made its mark with its top-of-the-range products for hotels and professional kitchens. When he arrived alongside his father in the company, Alberto deliberately abandoned mass production to forge a new path. Architect and theorist Alessandro Mendini introduced him to his architecture friends, Michael Graves, Philippe Starck, Richard Sapper, and many others, who were to leave their stamp on postmodern design of the 80s. The very first espresso coffee maker of the program was designed by Richard Sapper. It had a new closing system, now with a bayonet instead of a screw. But more importantly, it was the first coffee maker laying just claim to the fact that in addition to making the coffee, it could also shine in the most fashionable drawing rooms at a time when many brands had already tried to render the utensil charming or just plain presentable.
El café paulista viene di San Paolo, el café paulista viene do Brasil. que profuma amigo, el café Paulista.
The coffee from Sao Paulo that took the market by storm in the 50s and 60s had the knack of making us forget that the bean that was introduced into Brazil in the 17th century actually came from Guyana, and before that, the high plateaus of Ethiopia. The history of coffee and its beverage began on the shores of the Red Sea with its own objects and a whole culture of rituals and rules of hospitality. Appearing around the 13th century, infatuation with this powerful psychostimulant spread throughout the Ottoman Empire. Coffee consumption very quickly reached both sides of the Mediterranean, where it was served in meeting places for men. In Yemen, the port of Mocha remained for a long time the main port from which the roast beans left, hence the name of various objects and recipes. The Egyptians supplied Europe with Yemenite and Ethiopian coffee. They roasted the precious beans on the spot before sending them off, so that no one could grow coffee elsewhere. Until envoys from the colonial empires managed to steal the plants and grow them in their colonies. The East entered the minds of Europeans as a result of coffee being introduced by the Turkish embassy. In the 18th century, people could no longer do without it. In the royal court, people were convinced it facilitated conversation and bestowed wit and even intelligence upon them. As with most consumer goods, one day the beverage descended from the high spheres down into the street. Today, it is the most traded product in the world. It seems the whole world has trouble getting going in the morning. It is most widely consumed in Europe. Some people need intelligence, others need to be quick, others need to perform well. In Italy, a whole art of brewing coffee using steam pressure has developed. The espresso can be made in 30 seconds, fast and direct, like an express train.
Un espresso, per favore. Un espresso, per favore.
The word can still mean expressly, expressly for you and tailor-made. Ristretto, a strong espresso. Longo, a long espresso. Maraschino, with milk froth sprinkled with cocoa powder. The percolator of bars has entered offices and homes. It seems as though fascination for the steam machine, for its strength, power, and mystery have returned. Will these marvelous machines steal the show from our domestic espresso coffee makers? Is our Conica set to become but a distant memory? Today's architect-designers remember it, and we can see a family resemblance to Aldo Rossi's Conica in their tea and coffee towers. Even more laconic. Simple, straight, concise, and stripped of the spouts and handles of ordinary objects, their objects rise up like skyscrapers. Over 20 years ago, with his slender Conica, Aldo Rossi was already pointing skywards. Akari in Japanese means light and is written thus. Yet Akari can be written in another way and can designate another kind of light. That of the moon over the sun. That of day over night. That of the Orient over the Occident. That of the paper lamps of Isamu Noguchi, the sculptor of light who reinvented the Japanese lantern. The glowing constellation of Akari lamps developed over a period of 20 years, exploring over 100 forms, ranging from the globular volumes of 1950s biomorphism to the sophisticated geometric construction of the 1960s. Akari lamps are fashioned from washi paper plied over a higo bamboo structure, and they're all foldable. To see and to be seen. From the beginnings of time, mankind has lit his surroundings to make up for the absence of daylight. Domestic lighting followed the history of humanity, its evolution, its techniques. It adapted to a very wide range of needs, from the most intimate to the most large-scale public requirements. In the 50s, cinema entered the schools to enlighten young minds about electric light. Light determines space, revealing the interaction between matter, color, and form. It makes the world visible and makes us visible to the world. What interests us here is the containing of the light source by the shade, the diffuser, the reflector, which channel, fragment, and filter it. Via the lamp, light designates, underlines, reveals, indicates. It can be cold or hot, white or colored, flat, gray, or murky. We speak of light being surgical, menacing, foreboding, even apocalyptic. But light is inseparable from its contrary, shadow. And the remarkable quality of Akari lamps is the incomparable ease with which they negotiate between light and shade, by night and by day. Their quasi-spiritual, luminous, and sculptural properties find their true resonance in the artistic development of their creator. Isamu Noguchi was born in 1904 in Los Angeles. When he was asked what had made him an artist, he immediately cited his mother. The writer Noemi Gilmore raised her son alone in Japan. As for his father, the poet Yone Noguchi, he would never recognize this American son. An insatiable traveler born into a dual American-Japanese culture, he would never define himself as belonging to one or the other. In his teens, he resolutely embarked upon an artistic path in the United States. In 1927, a Guggenheim Foundation scholarship enabled him to come to Paris, where he worked as assistant to the sculptor Constantin Brancusi, a decisive stage in the orientation of his career. His whole life long, he remained bound to the Romanian artist, as to a father figure. Brancusi is considered to be the inventor of modern sculpture. For the pupil, the atmosphere which reigned in the master's studio in Impasse Ronsin was almost sacred. He would later say that all his life he had tried in vain to go beyond the form of the endless column, that giant totem of repeated truncated and inverted pyramidal motifs, a central piece in the work of Brancusi which haunted the Paris studio. The old master's fascination with polished reflective matter probably prompted Noguchi to place light at the center of his work. From the 30s onwards, he would use it as sculptural matter.
The Akari, these paper lanterns we talk about, came about because of my interest in light in relation to sculpture. After all sculpture is reflected light, you know. Every sculpture is a light sculpture in that sense. But in about 1943, I became involved with trying to make sculptures with lights embedded inside, you see, so that within a context of a room, you know, at night or even in the daytime, but at night presumably, there would be this light sculpture. The whole room could be a sculpture in a sense. You know, it could be a room within a room. You know, where there is no sun, where there is the nature has been cut off. You can recreate it in a sense. You see, and my Akari are in a sense sunlight, new sunlight. You see, which the paper permits, but by you know, permeating the atmosphere with the quality of paper, not merely electricity, you have the equivalent of a natural sunny environment.
Avec ses projecteurs et sa nef lumineuse, le 33e Salon des Arts Ménagers se place d'emblée sous le signe de la Biennale de la Lumière, par laquelle l'électricité se propose à la fois d'attirer l'attention du public, de l'informer, et même de répondre électroniquement à ses questions sur les problèmes d'énergie et d'éclairage à la maison, à l'école, au bureau ou à l'atelier.
L'électricité de France devait, comme l'an dernier, présenter le clou du salon. Ces plateaux volants qui offrent des friandises aux visiteurs et dansent un ballet fantastique. Et d'ailleurs, auprès des maisons de nos grands-mères, le moindre stand de ce salon semble sortir tout droit d'un authentique et incroyable conte de fées.
Cependant, dans ce salon, un stand laisse particulièrement rêveur, celui de la cuisine future, qui est un compromis entre le bureau de travail, le boudoir, le salon de coiffure et le laboratoire atomique. Les feux y cuisent sans brûler, l'eau coule sans mouiller, il faut être à la fois milliardaire pour l'acheter et polytechnicien pour s'en servir. Mais une maîtresse de maison accomplie doit savoir mêler poésie et technique.
Akari lamps emerged from out of this intense period of reconstruction and economic boom of the 1950s, rooted in the growing need for permanent change. New ways of life, new materials, new means of production. Modernity is defined by an aesthetic of priority. Formica, sheet metal, plastic, plexiglass, and frosted glass rule the day. Mass consumption becomes the major social trend. What people want of fashions and objects is not that they last, but that they satisfy immediate desire. It's the advent of resourcefulness, recuperation, and DIY, do-it-yourself. As the fear of nuclear war takes hold, people dream of outer space. Science fiction contaminates architecture and furniture design and invades TV screens. The aesthetic of the curvilinear predominates, fluid forms which delimit a surface or a volume. Design roots its inspiration in the field of the plastic arts. Lamps and light fittings, just like wallpapers, imitate the abstract motifs of Calder, Miro, and Arp. The imitation of now rare materials becomes widespread. Fake wood, fake stone, fake marble, imitation brick. Lighting appliances lend themselves most easily to showiness, ephemeralness, cheapness. Yet at the same time, designers enjoy extraordinary freedom of form, turning their backs on the right angle, using new materials in a riot of color. Return to Japan, to Hiroshima. The invention of the Akari lamps was in part linked to a project for a memorial to the victims of the atom bomb, a project which was never completed and which amounted in the end to 2 bridge guardrails, as here Noguchi was seen as an American citizen. But near Hiroshima is the town of Gifu, famous for the manufacture of umbrellas and paper lanterns. The mayor of Gifu invited the artist to convince him to invent a modern lamp by which to revitalize the dying local lantern industry. A new lamp to shine in the night of Hiroshima, as Noguchi was to say.
Akari, the ideogram of light which gives hope.
In a village in the north of Japan, the art of making paper from mulberry bark is still alive today. Washi comes from the Chinese wa, which means Japan, and shi, which means paper matter. A tradition which harks back 7 generations, the making of this paper requires enormous experience. The branches of the white mulberry tree are gathered into bunches and boiled in large vats. Only the white part is kept, which is then cooked to obtain a thick paste of fine particles. Diluted in water, this paste produces a fibrous suspension, which is then filtered through a bamboo mesh. The sheet obtained is left to dry in the sun on a rack. The first Akari prototypes drew their inspiration from the principle of the Japanese kite. They reconciled a constant interest in light and a renewed identification with Japan. The fabrication of an Akari is a 4-stage process. The craftsman assembles the framework, which will serve as a template for the lamp. As many wooden forms as lamp shapes, evoking instruments of a bygone age, tools of the Middle Ages, heavy and rudimentary compared to the lightness of the Akari. Then Higo bamboo stem, both tough and supple, is rolled in a spiral around the matrix. It will form the Akari's pliable armature. A special glue is applied to the bamboo to receive the humidified, softened paper. It is carefully fitted to alternate panels and trimmed along the glue line. Heating in an oven accelerates and seasons the drying process. Once the lamp is dried and molded, the template can be dismantled and removed. The paper is then creased to facilitate future folding and unfolding. The final touch is the insertion of a light metal structure to which the light bulb will be fitted, and which can serve to suspend the lamp or stand it on the floor or a table. The Akari is ready. All that remains is to summon up light. For Noguchi, Akari signifies light, but also evokes illumination and suggests weightlessness. These paper sculptures, chrysalises in luminous gestation, appear more fragile than they are. Akari lamps seem to float, projecting their light in passing, organic translucent hulls that mind over matter could seemingly move. If they barely exist when lit, when unlit, they fold and vanish. The kendo helmet and outfit worn by the young Noguchi in 1911 probably inspired this bakelite head, whose abstract lines house a loudspeaker. A disguised interphone, the radio nurse was designed to monitor children's bedrooms. It opened up the design market to Noguchi, who during the difficult years of the 30s mainly earned his livelihood making portraits, commissioned somewhere between design and sculpture, which enabled him to frequent the New York cultural scene, and to experiment with a variety of techniques, from American chrome to Japanese terracotta. In the 50s, Noguchi was mainly recognized as a sculptor, the inventor of abstract and organic forms and creator of emblematic objects of contemporary furniture. He paved the way for a whole generation engaged simultaneously in the pursuit of art, design, and architecture. For him, the terms design and sculpture were devoid of meaning and wholly interchangeable. It is possible to sit down and play with his sculptures, while at the same time his furniture and lamps have sculptural qualities. By means of a coherent formal vocabulary, these organic elements are freely united or fitted together, constituting a unified whole of pure, often primary forms, like the cube, the triangle, and the sphere. With a constant will to apprehend space, his numerous artistic endeavors, stage sets and gardens, sculpture and design, enabled this creator to experiment with an extraordinary range of materials, from steel to stone, from plastic to earth, from resin to wood, from paper to light. The forms conceived by the designer show that he is subject to the same influences as the artist. They have less to do with the functionality of a piece of furniture, a technique, or a material, but are more inspired of modern painting and sculpture. The overall geometry of Akaris is organized by the bamboo spiral, which structures the sheet of paper, whatever form the lamp may take, from egg shape to cube. This spiral motif runs right through Noguchi's work. Water, like light, seduces him through its plasticity and transparency. The aquatic spirals of his fountains at Osaka produce a vibration between objects and space. Water becomes light, which becomes form. The spiral of water endlessly unravels and vanishes. Its liquid flux becomes luminous, a spiral of light. Forms and functions may be copied, but not qualities, said Noguchi. My Akari lamps flooded the world with more imitations than originals, yet that only drove me to invent new models, inaccessible to imitation. In vain, as even his most complex models are today still copied by major international groups. The pillaging of the Akari lamp is one of the most widespread examples of design piracy. One only has to leaf through the catalogs of the cut-price furnishing firms to appreciate the extent. Influence is an avowal of memory as widespread as plagiarism, yet perhaps more acceptable. Today, the German designer Ingo Maurer claims direct lineage with Akari's, and his paper Ma Momnuchi's, which pun on the creator's name, are vibrant tributes to Noguchi. Of more intimate proportions, lamps that are personal and individual, originally in pure white paper, some Akaris are enriched with motifs and color to create a different relationship to light. Akaris have found an unexpected descendant in the garment objects of Japanese creator Issei Miyake, who qualifies himself as a designer of fashion. The visual resonances between Noguchi and Miyake are obvious. The one sculpts light, the other destructures the female body. The luminous specter of these paper lanterns, ancient clarity of fossilized stars, shimmers on the cusp of moonlight and solar eclipse. The Akari constellation will continue to shine beneath the celestial vault, at the crossroads of Orient and Occident, in the fusion of day and night, in the gentle union of difference, for the appeasement of all.